kettle is cooling in a kitchen you cannot see. The clock above the stove ticks in a rhythm no one is measuring. A single dish, left in the sink, holds the soft round shape of the light that used to fall on it before you turned off the switch and walked away down the hall. And here is the strange thought, the one that will keep gentle company with you tonight. You have no way, from where you lie now, to prove that any of it is still there. Not the kettle, not the clock, not the tiles beneath your bare feet an hour ago. Only the memory of them, and a quiet belief so old you never questioned it. Hello, and welcome. If these long, slow nights have become a place you return to, you might consider staying for the ones that go even further, the deeper conversations that don't quite fit here, the ideas the daytime rush tends to bury, the sense that beneath every question there is always something more underneath. That thread continues in the quiet room, on Patreon, for the minds that don't switch off. The link rests in the description whenever you're ready. Tonight, we walk very slowly around one small ancient puzzle, whether the world outside your closed eyes is still there, and what the answer, if there is one, might feel like when it finally arrives. Imagine holding an apple in your hand. You feel its weight, its cool skin, the small ridge where the stem once was. Now close your fingers around it and close your eyes. The apple is still there, of course. You can feel it. But what part of the apple exactly are you feeling? A pressure against your palm, a temperature, a shape traced by nerves. Each of these things is happening inside you, not out there in the fruit itself. And this is where a soft-spoken bishop, more than 3 centuries ago, began to tug at a thread the rest of us usually leave alone. George Berkeley, in the early 1700s, sat with this thought and followed it further than most were willing to go. His conclusion, gentle in tone but startling in shape, was that to be, for a thing, is to be perceived. A tree, a table, a distant hill, none of them, he suggested, exist as raw objects hiding behind our senses. They exist as bundles of experiences, held together by a mind that notices them. Take away every possible perceiver, and Berkeley believed the very meaning of existing out there begins to dissolve. It sounds at first like a lonely idea, as if the world might blink out the moment you look away. But Berkeley did not intend loneliness. He was, above all, a man of faith, and he softened his own argument with a quiet reassurance. Even when no human eye is watching the kettle in the kitchen, he believed, a wider awareness still holds it. In his own gentle phrasing, all things rest continually within the attention of God. The world does not vanish when you turn your back. It simply moves, so to speak, into another kind of noticing. Whether or not you share his theology, something in the idea is worth sitting with, because even a modern, non-religious reader can feel the shape of what he was reaching for. That reality, whatever else it is, seems oddly tied to being witnessed. The furniture of your home, the rings of Saturn, the deepest trench in the ocean floor, all of them, in your daily life, only ever appear to you through some act of perception. Direct, unfiltered access to a thing in itself is something you have never actually had. You have only ever had experiences of things. That is a small, strange realization. You lean into it slowly. It doesn't necessarily mean the world isn't there. It means that the there you know is always, without exception, arriving through you. Some have found that unsettling. Others have found it oddly freeing, as if the sharp line between self and world were softer than school had taught them. Berkeley himself seemed to find it comforting. If existence and awareness were braided so tightly together, then nothing truly falls out of being. It only passes from one kind of attention into another. Tonight, we are not asked to accept his answer. We are only asked to notice that the question is real, that when you close your eyes on your kitchen, on your street, on the wide dark field of the world, the assumption that everything is still stubbornly there is exactly that, an assumption. A very old, very reasonable assumption, but not, as you may once have believed, a proof. And so a door opens, quietly, in the wall of common sense. Beyond it, other thinkers are already waiting, each carrying their own small lantern for the same unwatched room. There is a scene from 1763 that has echoed through philosophy classrooms ever since. 2 men are walking together after a discussion of Berkeley's ideas. One of them, the writer James Boswell, remarks that although Berkeley's argument seems impossible to disprove, no one truly believes it. His companion Samuel Johnson is a large, blunt, brilliant man, and his response is famously physical. He strikes his boot against a nearby stone, watches it rebound, and declares with satisfaction, "I refute it thus." For centuries, that moment has been quoted as a kind of common-sense victory. A single kick, and the whole tower of idealist philosophy is supposed to come down. The stone is solid. The foot hurts. What more do you need? If you sit with the scene a little longer, though, something quieter emerges, because everything Johnson felt in that moment, the resistance, the small shock travelling up his leg, the sound of leather against rock, happened once again inside him. His nerves fired, his brain assembled the sensation. The stone he refuted with was, in every practical sense, a stone-shaped experience unfolding within his own body. Berkeley, had he been standing there, would likely have smiled, not because the stone wasn't real, but because Johnson's kick did not touch the question at all. The question was never whether we feel a world. The question was whether that felt world exists in the way we naturally assume, as an independent theatre of solid things, humming along quite happily, whether or not any mind is present. Modern neuroscience has, in its own patient way, deepened this puzzle rather than resolving it. When you press your hand against a wall, what you experience as hardness is not the wall itself. It is a cascade of signals from pressure receptors in your skin, interpreted by regions of your brain that have spent your entire life learning what hard should feel like. The wall is real, almost certainly, but the hardness is a translation, and translations, as every reader knows, are never quite the same as the original. This is why some philosophers have quietly reopened the door Johnson tried so decisively to shut. They point out that a robust sense of out there is one of the most convincing illusions the mind produces. It has to be convincing. A creature who felt uncertain about the ground beneath its feet would not survive long. Evolution has strong opinions about doubt, and yet, when you slow down and examine your own experience, you begin to notice how much of your certainty is inference. You believe the chair behind you is still shaped like a chair because you sat in it a moment ago, because the room has been reliable, because you have never known chairs to melt. Belief upon belief upon belief, stacked so quickly and quietly that it feels like direct knowledge. Perhaps Johnson was not entirely wrong. Something did push back against his boot. Some order in the world declined to let him pass through the stone. That resistance is not nothing. It is one of the deepest clues we have that the universe is not a private hallucination, but it is not, on its own, proof of a world that persists unchanged when every eye and every instrument turns away. The stone rebounded. Johnson walked on. The philosophy did not fall. It only settled a little more quietly into the ground, waiting for the next thinker to notice that a single certain kick, however hard, still travels through the softness of a mind before it reaches anything called truth. There is an older riddle that has drifted through generations of quiet arguments, and you have almost certainly met it before. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? Most of us have answered it, at some point, with a small shrug. Of course it does. Trees fall, air moves, physics does not wait for an audience. And yet, if you press a little closer, the riddle refuses to fold neatly. Begin with what actually happens when a tree comes down. Fibers in the trunk snap, the great mass of wood accelerates through empty air. When it strikes the ground, the impact sends a shudder outward, a wave of compressed and rarefied air moving through the forest in expanding rings. That much is not in question. Vibrations happen. Molecules push against molecules. The physical event is entirely real, whether or not anyone is nearby. But then there is a second event, quieter and stranger. Somewhere, some living creature must possess an ear, a membrane thin as paper, tiny bones evolved from ancient jaws, a spiral of fluid deep inside the skull, lined with hair cells that bend and translate motion into electrical whispers. Only when those signals reach a brain and are woven into perception does anything we call sound actually appear. Before that point, in the strictest sense, there is only moving air. This is where the old riddle regains its teeth, because the word sound has always been a little slippery. It can mean the wave itself, a physical disturbance measurable by any instrument, or it can mean the felt experience of hearing, the crack and the rush and the settling silence afterward. The first is out in the world, the second is inside a listener. So when someone asks whether the falling tree makes a sound, they may be asking two entirely different questions without noticing. Are there air pressure changes? Certainly. Is there the experience of hearing? Not unless something exists to do the hearing. You feel at this point how quietly the ground has shifted. What seemed like a childish puzzle turns out to touch the same nerve Berkeley reached towards centuries ago. Between an event in the world and an experience of that event, there is always a translator, bone, membrane, nerve, brain. Remove the translator, and the event does not disappear. But something else does. The world grows quieter, in a way instruments alone cannot fully capture. Auditory neuroscientists have noticed that even for those of us with perfect hearing, the ear is far from a passive recorder. It amplifies certain frequencies, ignores others, adjusts itself in real time to help you pick out a friend's voice inside a noisy cafe. The sound you hear is already curated by biology before your awareness ever meets it. Two people standing beside the same fallen tree would hear different versions of its fall, subtly but truly different. So the forest is not silent when no one is there, and it is not exactly full of sound either. It is full of movement, full of pattern, full of the raw material from which sound can be made, waiting for a listener to complete the equation. This is the thread we keep tugging tonight. That much of what we call the world seems to live at a meeting point, where something out there brushes against something within us, and only then becomes real in the way we usually mean the word. The tree falls in either case, but whether the forest sings or simply trembles depends, quietly, on who is passing by. If Berkeley reached toward the mind's role in the world with the gentle intensity of a bishop, Immanuel Kant, some decades later, tried to do something more like careful cartography. He wanted to map the territory between what is truly out there and what merely appears to us, and he did so, famously, by suggesting that these two territories may never be perfectly known to one another. Kant made a distinction that has quietly reshaped philosophy ever since. On one side, he placed the world as it appears to us, the phenomenal world, the kitchen, the tree, the falling stone, the colors, the temperatures, the shapes we register through our senses and thoughts. On the other side, he placed the world as it is in itself, the noumenal world, the thing behind the appearance, the reality untouched by any observer. And then he did something startling. He suggested that the noumenal world, whatever it is not something we can ever directly reach, not because it is hidden behind some curtain we might one day pull aside, but because our very means of knowing anything, our eyes, our concepts, our sense of space and time, already shape what we receive. Whatever the world is when nothing is looking, it does not arrive at us in that form. It arrives already dressed in the categories of the human mind. Some have imagined this as a wall. That is not quite what Kant meant. It is more like a veil, extremely fine, wrapped around everything you have ever experienced. You see through it so smoothly that you have never noticed the fabric, the colors of your walls, the melody of a song you love, the exact texture of a memory of your childhood home. All of them arrive filtered, shaped, translated. The veil is not deceiving you. It is how seeing happens at all. This is where his idea grows quietly astonishing, because it means the sense you have of a solid, independent backstage, a real world waiting just behind your perceptions, may itself be part of the perception. The mind builds a mental scaffolding of space and time in which experiences can occur, and this scaffolding feels so seamless that we take it for the structure of reality itself. But Kant wondered whether space and time, as we know them, might be more like the shape of our windows than the shape of the world. Modern neuroscientists sometimes speak in strangely similar language. They observe that space, as you perceive it, is constructed inside the brain from a great weave of signals, visual depth, muscular feedback, memory, expectation. Time, too, is stitched together, sometimes stretched or compressed by attention and emotion. What you call now is not a knife's edge. It is a small, soft window of processing, arriving already assembled. If the mind quietly builds the very stage on which reality plays, then Kant's veil is not far from what science has slowly come to describe. The world is real, Something is genuinely out there, but the version of it you know, in every waking moment, has been woven through you before you meet it. You do not feel this weaving, you simply feel the world, and that seamlessness is itself part of the mystery. That whatever the universe is when nothing is looking, it may be quieter, stranger, and more spacious than any word we use for it here, a shape without color, a texture without touch, waiting patiently on the other side of a veil we cannot quite reach, yet cannot quite stop reaching toward. If Kant left a veil between us and the deeper world, one of his most devoted readers refused to leave it entirely opaque. Arthur Schopenhauer, decades later, believed there was at least one place where the veil grew thin, one region of reality where we do not merely see appearances, but somehow feel the thing itself from the inside. That region, he suggested, was our own body. Consider it for a moment. When you look at your hand, you see an object like any other. You could describe its color, its shape, the small lines across the palm. In that sense, your hand is a phenomenon, an appearance, filtered through the same senses that show you a spoon or a distant hillside. But there is a second kind of knowing you have of your hand that no outside object gives you. You can move it, you can feel it, from within, as a living presence. You know your body not just as a picture, but as an act. Schopenhauer took this quiet, familiar experience and treated it as a clue. If, on the outside we see only appearances, and on the inside we feel something more direct, then perhaps that inner knowing offers a hint about what the veil is hiding elsewhere. Not identical, not exactly transferable, but a whisper. He gave the name will to this inner pressure, a striving, a becoming, a restless urge that seemed to lie beneath all form. You do not have to accept the whole of his cosmology to feel the shape of what he was reaching toward. There is something moving beneath appearances, something restless in atoms, in cells, in weather, in thought. Whatever we call it, it does not sit still. The world is not a still life painting. It hums. Where Kant's veil was almost architectural, Schopenhauer's was breathing. And here is where his ideas quietly reach forward into the century and a half that has followed him, and touch the strange discoveries of later physics. Because a recurring puzzle of the last 100 years has been that reality, at its finest layers, does not seem to be a set of neatly separated things being passively observed. It seems entangled, participatory, active, not a painting on a wall, more like a wave that shifts when noticed. Schopenhauer, of course, knew nothing of quantum mechanics. He wrote by candlelight, in a language of philosophers, not physicists. But the intuition he pressed into is a distant cousin of what some scientists have felt in their own way, that observation and reality may be woven, that the world is not simply out there waiting to be seen, but somehow reaches toward its seers as much as they reach toward it. He phrased it in his own metaphysical way. The world is both representation, meaning our mental picture of it, and will, meaning the deeper striving beneath. The two are not separate universes, they are one universe glimpsed from two directions, from outside as appearance, from inside as force. You may find, if you slow down with this idea tonight, that it changes how you feel about the kitchen you left behind. The unwatched world is not a still, silent stage set. It is something alive with tendency, with motion, with a quiet inner pressure that continues even when no one is looking. Whether Schopenhauer was right in his particular vocabulary is not something anyone can prove, but his whispered amendment to Kant, that we are ourselves a small opening in the veil, a place where reality gets to feel itself, is one of the more beautiful thoughts a wakeful mind can hold on a long dark night, and it prepares us, gently, for the question we cannot avoid much longer. What would proof of any of this even look like, when the one asking is already part of the answer? There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes from chasing certainty. You know it well, perhaps, the mind circling a question late at night, wanting, above all, something firm to stand on. Just tell me, it says. Is the world there when I look away, or isn't it? Give me proof, but sit with the word proof for a while, and it begins to shimmer, the way a familiar word does when you repeat it too many times. What, exactly, would proof of an unwatched world look like? Imagine for a moment that you tried to design the perfect experiment. You want to know whether the kitchen persists when no one is aware of it. So you set up a camera, close the door, walk down the hall. Sometime later, you return and watch the footage. The kettle sat still. The clock ticked. The dish stayed in the sink. Beautiful. But then a small patient question rises inside you. That footage, when did it become knowledge of the kitchen? Only when you watched it. Only when a mind engaged with what the camera had recorded. The camera itself does not know a kitchen exists. It only stores patterns of light, waiting for a witness. So you try again. You leave 2 cameras, 3, 20. You leave an entire array of instruments in the room, each independent, each recording. But when you finally review any of them, it is you, once more, who assembles their reports into a picture of a persisting world. Every proof of the unwatched requires in the end a watcher. This is not a trick. It is a strange, quiet feature of the question itself. The moment you attempt to check whether reality carries on without observation, you have to observe. The experiment cancels its own conditions. Some philosophers have found this frustrating, as if the universe were being coy. Others have found it revealing. The situation, they suggest, is telling us something about the shape of knowing. That knowledge is not an aerial view. It is not a God's eye perspective descending onto a scene. It is always, always a relationship between something that knows and something that is known. And once you feel that clearly, the original question begins to change color. It stops being, does the world exist when no one looks, and becomes something softer, something more honest. What kind of existence does a world have that only ever meets us through the act of being met? Notice, too, that this is not the same as saying nothing exists without you. Almost every serious thinker who has spent time with this puzzle, including Berkeley in his own way, has believed something remains. The stars did not switch off before there were eyes to see them. The earth turned before there were humans to notice its turning. There is a deep intuition and considerable evidence that reality has a life of its own. What the puzzle really does is humble our sense of what proof can reach. Some questions are not solved by better instruments. They are answered, if at all, by living inside them with more patience and less demand. The question of the unwatched world may be one of those, not a lock waiting for a key, but a door that only opens when you stop trying to force it and simply lean, quietly, against its frame. That is a strange comfort in its own way, because if certainty is not on offer, then something else can begin, a slower, gentler relationship with mystery itself. Not defeat, not surrender, just a willingness to let the world be, at times, deeper than any single mind can measure. And with that willingness in hand, we can turn now toward the smallest layers of reality, where 20th century physicists have found their own strange versions of this very question, and quietly discovered that the act of looking may not be as innocent as it seems. You are standing, in your mind's eye, in front of a wall with 2 narrow slits cut into it. Behind the wall is a screen. In front of it, at a comfortable distance, a small source that can send out particles, one at a time, electrons perhaps, or photons, tiny packets of light. Whatever the source is, you have set it so that only one particle travels toward the wall at a time. It goes through, or seems to, and lands somewhere on the screen beyond, making a tiny mark. You expect something reasonable. You expect that each particle will pass through one slit or the other, and that over time, the marks on the screen will form 2 soft stripes, one behind each slit, small dots gathering into a shape you could have predicted. That is not what happens. Instead, as particle after particle strikes the screen, an entirely different pattern begins to emerge. Not 2 stripes, a whole rippling series of bands, bright, dark, spreading across the screen in a way that only makes sense if each particle, somehow, had passed through both slits at once and interfered with itself on the way, like a wave crossing over another wave, rising here and cancelling there. This is the double-slit experiment. It has been performed in various forms thousands of times since the early 20th century, with electrons, photons, atoms, and even large molecules made of hundreds of atoms, and its outcome is one of the strangest recurring facts of modern science. But it is what happens next that has haunted physicists for a century. You decide, being careful, that you want to know which slit each particle actually went through, so you place a tiny detector near one of the slits. Nothing else in the setup changes. The wall, the screen, the source, all the same. Only now, quietly, you are watching. The interference pattern disappears. The particles, once observed at the slit, behave like the tidy little marbles you originally expected. 2 stripes on the screen, exactly as common sense predicted. Remove the detector, and the strange banded pattern returns. Turn it back on, and the particles fall obediently into 2 simple lines again. Read that once, gently, and then read it again. The mere act of gathering information about the path a particle takes seems to reshape the particle's behavior. Not because your detector is clumsy, and not because it disturbs the particle in some rough physical way. Even the most delicate, least invasive kinds of measurement produce the same effect. Something about knowing, or being knowable, is enough to change what unfolds. For most of human history, we have imagined the universe as a great performance happening on a stage, with observers as passive audience members. Whether or not you were in your seat, the play carried on. The double-slit experiment quietly refuses to fit that picture. In its small, patient way, it suggests that at the finest scales of the world, the act of looking is somehow part of the play itself. Physicists have argued, for a century, about what this means. Some see it as a hint about the deep nature of reality. Others treat it as a puzzle about the mathematics of measurement. Almost no one, however, denies that something strange is happening. You do not need to solve the mystery tonight. You only need to feel its edge. That in laboratories all over the world, again and again, one of the most reliable experiments in physics quietly tells us that the world when no one is watching and the world when someone is watching may not be exactly the same shape. That is a soft, remarkable thought to carry with you as we go deeper. Because if the tiniest particles change their behavior in the presence of observation, then the old, comfortable image of a reality that simply sits there, complete and unchanged whether you look or not, begins to feel less like fact and more like a habit of thought, a habit worth loosening, slowly, in the dark. The strangeness of the double-slit experiment does not sit alone. It rests inside a larger puzzle that physicists have politely called the measurement problem. And of all the honest confessions science has made in the last century, this one may be the most quietly astonishing. In quantum theory, the world at its smallest scales is described by something called a wave function. You do not need any mathematics to feel what it is. Picture a soft cloud of possibilities. An electron, before it is measured, is not simply over here or over there. It is described by a spread of chances, a smooth mist of could be here, could be there, could be all sorts of places, with these particular likelihoods. The wave function is that mist. For years, decades even, physicists watched these mists behave. They spread, they ripple, they flow through space with a graceful, wave-like calm. The equations that describe them, worked out in the 1920s by scientists like Erwin Schrödinger, are some of the most successful equations ever written. They predict the world of atoms, chemistry and light with astonishing precision. But there is a strange seam in the theory, a place where the equations, so smooth in one moment, seem to jerk in the next. When you measure the particle, when you finally check, say, where the electron is, the cloud of possibility no longer behaves like a cloud. Suddenly, the mist collapses. Where there was once a spread of chances, there is now a single definite answer. The electron is here, at this point, not there. The other possibilities apparently evaporate. Nothing in the mathematics tells you, cleanly, why this should happen. The smooth equation that describes the mist does not itself contain a clean instruction saying, and now, at the moment of measurement, collapse into one answer. The transition from cloud to point, from possibility to fact, has never been fully explained. It has only been described. This is the measurement problem. It is not a small footnote in the theory. It sits, quietly, at the very center. And it is one of physics' most honest confessions of mystery. Different physicists have offered different responses. Some suggest that the collapse is a real physical event, and that we simply need better theories to describe what triggers it. Others believe there is no collapse at all, that the wave function keeps spreading and includes all outcomes, and that we merely find ourselves inside one of them. Others still argue that the wave function is not a physical thing at all, but a description of what we know, and that collapse is only our knowledge updating. Notice how these are not fringe ideas. They are serious positions held by serious people, precisely because the mystery is real and unresolved. For tonight, though, the details of these interpretations matter less than the shape of the puzzle itself, because whichever answer you lean toward, one strange feature persists. In quantum theory, the act of measurement, the act of the world becoming known, plays a role that has no clean parallel in older physics. It is not just a passive glance. It is in some way that we cannot fully describe, a hinge. Before measurement, a wide field of possibility. After measurement, a single fact. Some have wondered whether measurement might be too narrow a word. After all, what counts as a measurement? Does it require a human, a lab, a decision? Or does any interaction with anything count? A dust mote brushing an atom, a photon striking a leaf, a molecule bumping into another molecule in a cold room somewhere. If any such nudge counts as measurement, then perhaps the world is measuring itself constantly, everywhere, without needing human eyes at all. We will return to that thought later, because it holds a great deal of comfort. For now, hold this in your mind as you drift. At the finest layers of nature, the world does not seem to have finished making up its mind until something interacts with it. And the act of interacting, of noticing, in the broadest possible sense, is stitched into the very way reality resolves from possibility into fact. That is not the death of common sense, it is only its gentle humbling. A reminder that our everyday picture of solid objects sitting patiently in space, waiting to be found, is a large and beautiful approximation. Beneath it, something subtler is at work, and we are only, slowly, learning how to speak of it. There is a thought experiment that Eugene Winger, a Nobel laureate in physics, first sketched in the 1960s, and it has been quietly troubling physicists ever since. It is the kind of story that seems small at first, and then, if you follow it carefully, opens like a hallway inside a house you thought you knew. Imagine a friend of yours, a careful scientist, sealed inside a windowless laboratory. Inside the lab, they perform a quantum measurement, say, checking whether a particular particle spins up or spins down. Two possible outcomes, 50-50 odds. Your friend looks at the instrument, sees the result, writes it down. From their perspective, the measurement is complete. The world has settled into one definite outcome. You, however, are outside. You have no direct access to what your friend has seen. The entire sealed lab, including your friend, is described by quantum theory as one large system, and according to the equations, until you open the door and gather information from the room, that whole system remains, mathematically, in a superposition, a mixture of outcomes. Your friend, together with the instrument, together with the observed particle, exists in the strange smooth cloud where both possibilities coexist. Here is the delicate point. Your friend does not feel this way at all. From inside, they are certain. They saw the spin up, or the spin down. They can describe the moment vividly, whereas from your side, according to the theory, no such definite fact has yet come into being. Two observers, one event, two apparently different realities. For a long time, this seemed like a curiosity, a puzzle you might discuss in the seminar room and leave behind at the door. But in 2019, a version of this thought experiment was extended and mathematically sharpened by physicists Daniela Frauchiger and Renato Renner. Their careful analysis of the scenario, later refined by others, suggested that under certain reasonable assumptions, quantum theory can lead to different observers, all reasoning correctly, coming to logically incompatible conclusions about the same event. Not different in the way we might disagree about a memory. Different in a way that seems to strike at the heart of what we mean by fact. Sit with that quietly. Two rational observers, using the same physics, could look at the same experiment and arrive at conclusions that cannot both be simultaneously true in the old, comfortable sense. Something has to give. Either the assumptions of quantum theory need to be adjusted, or our idea that there is a single, observer-independent story of what happened may need to be softened. Some physicists have taken this as a signal that the wave function is not describing the world itself, but rather each observer's information about the world, In that reading, different observers naturally have different wave functions because they have different knowledge. There is no contradiction, only a plurality of perspectives. Others take it more radically, suggesting that even the concept of an absolute event, a fact that all observers must eventually agree on, might not survive at the smallest scales. Reality, in this reading, is not a single stage seen from many angles. It is more like a mesh of local viewpoints that agree extremely well in ordinary life, but that can, in rare quantum situations, quietly diverge. Neither of these positions is settled. That is the honest truth of it. But even the fact that intelligent, careful physicists take such possibilities seriously is a small revolution. It means the old faith in a single, view-from-nowhere world is at least on gentle probation. Bring that thought back to your kitchen for a moment, to the kettle that may or may not be cooling in the dark. Wigner's friend does not tell you the kettle isn't there. It suggests something subtler, that the story of what is really happening in the kitchen, when different minds and instruments are involved, may not be a single tidy sentence with a full stop at the end. It might be a small choir of perspectives, some more informed than others, all quietly humming the same tune with slightly different words. That is a strangely comforting thought, if you let it be. Because if reality is a choir, then the world does not depend on your voice alone. Every other perceiver, every instrument, every cell in every creature is already helping to hold the note. And when you finally return from your bed, from your dream, from your simple absence, you rejoin a song that never truly stopped. Somewhere in the middle of the 20th century, the physicist John Archibald Wheeler began to sketch experiments in his notebooks that seemed almost mischievous. He was one of the great figures of American physics, a friend and collaborator of Einstein, a teacher of many of the next generation's most creative minds, and he had a fondness for imagining setups that gently disturbed our sense of time. His most famous invention is now called the delayed choice experiment. The idea grows directly out of the double-slit setup you already know. Recall, if you check which slit a particle goes through, you see two simple stripes on the screen. If you do not check, you see an interference pattern, as if each particle traveled as a wave through both slits at once. Wheeler asked a small, deceptively simple question. What if you delay the choice of whether to check until after the particle has already passed the slits? At first, this sounds impossible. Common sense insists that whatever the particle did at the slits, behaved as a wave or as a particle, is already decided by the time it reaches the screen. If you decide only afterward whether to observe its path, surely that cannot reach backward and change what has already happened. And yet, when versions of this experiment are actually carried out in the laboratory, as they were beginning in the late 1970s and increasingly with great precision in the 1990s and 2000s, the outcomes fit the choice made afterward. If, at the last possible moment, you decide to place a which path detector, the particles behave as if they had traveled as tidy little marbles through single slits all along. If, at the last possible moment, you decide not to, they behave as if they had traveled as waves through both. Notice gently what this does not say. It does not say that you have literally rewritten the past. Wheeler was careful, and physicists after him even more so, to emphasize that no signal, no message, no information travels backward in time. Causality, in the strictest sense, is preserved. What the experiment suggests instead is subtler, that the very concept of the particle having had a definite path before the choice was made may not apply. Wheeler put it in a phrase that has been quoted ever since. He said that no elementary quantum phenomenon is a phenomenon until it is a registered phenomenon, until something is measured. In his view, there is no clean fact of what happened. The past, in that sense, remains soft, not blank, not deceitful, but not yet fully drawn. Later, cosmologists like Wheeler extended this idea into thought experiments involving light from distant galaxies. If light from a quasar, billions of light years away, can be gently bent by a foreground object and split into two possible paths on its journey to Earth, then a choice made in a lab today to measure the arriving light one way or another appears, formally, to influence which path the light must have taken across the eons. Nothing is edited, the photons still arrive, but which story we can tell about their long journey depends, in a quiet way, on what happens now. You feel the shape of this, even if the equations are beyond us tonight. It suggests that the past is not always as solid and complete as we imagine. It is, in some cases, more like a manuscript with certain phrases still to be inked, held open until the moment of measurement leans in with the pen. None of this means your memories are unreal. It does not mean that history is a stage that you personally can redirect. What it means, more softly, is that at the finest layers of nature, the character of an event is not always fully fixed the instant it happens. There are corners of reality where the world seems to wait, quietly, for the story to include its witness before deciding on all its final details. Bring that back, once more, to your unwatched kitchen. Not to unsettle you, you can already feel that the metaphor is being stretched gently, not literally applied. But there is a soft echo. The old picture of a world entirely complete without you, needing only to be looked at, gives way to a subtler image. A world that is, in most places and at most scales, extraordinarily well behaved and stable, and yet, at its deepest levels, seemingly weaved together with the very acts of observation that would try to describe it. And so we are left with a strange, thoughtful patience. The past waits. The particle drifts. The measurement, when it comes, gathers everything into a shape we can call a fact. But underneath, something more open is always breathing. By now, you might be feeling something like a soft dizziness. If particles change their behavior when observed, if observers can disagree about facts, if the past itself sometimes seems to lean on the future, then how exactly does the world stay so stubbornly stable most of the time? Why does the kettle not shimmer between existing and not existing? Why do you walk into your kitchen and always find it, more or less, the way you left it? Here, physics has developed one of its softer, gentler answers, and it goes by the name of decoherence. The word sounds technical. Its meaning, though, is quiet and almost consoling. Decoherence is the process by which the strangeness of the quantum world dissolves into the everyday firmness of ordinary experience. It is the reason atoms feel like atoms and tables feel like tables, even though, at their finest scales, they are made of the same misty possibilities as the electrons in the double-slit experiment. Here is the heart of it. In the laboratory, when we perform experiments like the double slit, we work very hard to isolate a single particle from the rest of the world. Vacuum chambers, cold temperatures, careful shielding. In those pristine conditions, quantum weirdness has room to breathe. The particle's smooth cloud of possibilities stays intact, because nothing else is touching it. But in the wider world, no such isolation exists. Every object, from a grain of dust to a distant planet, is constantly being brushed by countless interactions. Photons of light from every direction, air molecules bouncing against surfaces, warmth radiating from nearby matter, cosmic particles passing quietly through walls. In this endless soft rain of contact, the world is measuring itself, moment by moment. This is the key insight of decoherence. Measurement, in the deepest sense, does not require a human. It does not require a lab. It does not require consciousness. It only requires interaction. Anytime one system meaningfully entangles with another, information about their state leaks into the environment, and the crisp, misty possibilities of the isolated quantum picture begin to fade into a single, effectively classical outcome. Now bring this back to your kitchen. The kettle sits on the counter. Photons stream through the window and reflect off its surface, whether or not any human eye is present. Air molecules jostle against it. Its own atoms trade tiny warmth with the world around them. Every one of those interactions is, in effect, an ongoing measurement. The environment itself is constantly noticing the kettle. From the moment it was made, it has hardly been unobserved for even the smallest fraction of a second. So when you turn off the light and walk down the hallway, the kettle does not drift into some misty limbo. It is not waiting for you, specifically, to return in order to make up its mind about existing. It has been surrounded by an enormous, patient audience of interactions this whole time, an audience that includes the walls, the air, the cooling surface itself. The universe, at every level, has been watching, not with eyes, with physics. This is the soft, remarkable reassurance that decoherence gives us. The world does not need your gaze to hold together. The double-slit experiment is unusual precisely because it takes so much effort to preserve a state where nothing else is looking. The everyday world is the opposite. It is drenched in interaction. It is impossible to keep secret from itself. Some have quietly compared this to a great whispering. Every object is telling every other object where it is, all the time, in a language of nudges and glances too small for us to see. In such a chorus, no single voice needs to shout for the melody to hold. The moon does not need your eyes. It has the rest of the universe watching. And so, without denying the depth of the mysteries we have been exploring, Decoherence offers a genuine answer to the anxious version of tonight's question. Does the world persist when you turn away? Yes, in almost every practical sense of the word. Not because it is a hard, unfeeling stage that needs no one, but because the universe is so full of quiet notice that it never truly stops attending to itself. You are not the reason your kitchen exists. The moon does not depend on you. The trees continue to sway when the last human eye has closed for the night. What your looking does add is something else, something rarer, softer, and more personal. Not the reality of the world, which was already sustained, but a certain kind of meaning within it. The kind that only arrives when a mind meets what a universe of physics has held ready. That is a beautiful thing to carry into sleep, that the world does not need your watching to be, but seems at times to appreciate it when it arrives. Even with the reassurance of decoherence, some physicists have felt that the role of the observer is not quite so easily set aside. They have wondered whether there is something deeper to say, not to frighten us, but to more honestly capture what quantum theory has been quietly whispering all along. Two such voices, coming from different generations, are worth listening to together tonight. The first is John Wheeler, whom you already know as the imaginer of delayed choice experiments. The second is a small community of thinkers who, in the last 2 decades, have developed something called QBism. Wheeler, near the end of his long career, spoke of what he called the participatory universe. His idea, phrased in his own careful way, was that observers might not be simply passive receivers of a preformed reality. Instead, in some subtle sense, they might be part of the process by which reality comes into definite form. He liked to draw a symbol he called the U of the universe, a great arc curving around from one end to the other, with an eye at one tip looking back at the tail. The universe, he suggested, gives rise to observers, and observers in turn participate in bringing the universe into more definite being. He was careful to insist that this was speculation, an image, a way of gesturing at something the mathematics did not yet fully explain. He did not claim to have proved that reality needs conscious minds. He only asked whether the strict separation between subject and object, which classical physics had assumed, might be a simplification that quantum physics quietly refused to fully honor. QBism, developed by physicists such as Christopher Fuchs, David Mermin, and Rudiger Schack in the 2000s, takes this thread and pulls it in its own direction. The name comes from quantum Bayesianism, and the movement offers a striking reinterpretation of what a wave function actually is. In their view, the wave function is not a description of the world out there. It is a description of an observer's beliefs about the world, updated according to what they experience. When a measurement happens, the wave function does not collapse because some physical process crushes it. It updates because the observer has learned something new. At first, this can sound almost like a retreat, as if physics were saying that its most famous equations describe our knowledge rather than the world. But the cubists insist that this is not a small point. If the wave function lives in the observer, then physics itself begins to look like the study of how observers can meaningfully engage with a universe that always meets them halfway. Reality remains real. It is not invented by any single mind, but every specific account of it is, unavoidably, an account from within. You do not need to accept cubism or Wheeler's participatory universe as final truth. Very few physicists do. What matters is that these are serious, careful positions held by careful people, precisely because the strangeness we have been walking through is real. It has not gone away because scientists wished it might, and there is something oddly consoling in these frames, even for a non-physicist listening in the dark. They suggest that observers are not intruders in a completed world. They are participants, in a small, honest way, in how the world becomes describable at all. Not gods, not creators, but something more like guests who are also, quietly, part of the meal. If you take Wheeler and the Cubists gently, you can hold their vision like this. The kitchen you left behind is real, and it is real without you. Decoherence keeps its shape. Physics holds it steady. But when you finally return, when your senses meet the light and steam and quiet hum of the room, something happens that is not just the world confirming itself. Your presence adds a small line to a very long story. Not the story of whether the kitchen exists, but the story of how, in this small pocket of the universe, that existence comes to be felt and known and held in mind. That may be the deepest thing tonight has to offer, this early in the walk. That the question, is the world there when I look away, turns out to have a soft, layered answer. Yes, in every practical sense, held by an ocean of interaction the universe never stops making with itself. And yet, in some quieter way, the world you personally know, the meaningful, coloured, felt world, begins whenever your attention returns to it, like a lamp being lit in a room that had all its walls, all its objects, all its air already present, waiting patiently for warmth. That is a good place to pause for a moment, to let the physics settle, because in the chapters ahead, we will turn away from the outer instruments and toward the strangest instrument of all, the human brain itself, and the quiet ways in which it has been building rooms for you all your life without ever telling you it was doing so. Slow your attention now to the space around your body, the blanket at your shoulder, the curve of the pillow, the temperature of the air on your face. All of it feels immediate, direct, as if you are simply receiving the world through a clean pane of glass called perception. That is one of the most convincing feelings your nervous system produces, and in the last few decades, cognitive neuroscientists have gently begun to suggest that it is, in its own beautiful way, a kind of controlled hallucination. The phrase belongs to the neuroscientist Anil Seth, but the underlying idea has many parents. It is often called the predictive processing model of the brain, and it turns the older picture of perception almost upside down. For a long time, we imagined the brain as something like a passive camera. Light comes in through the eyes, sound through the ears, touch through the skin. The brain, in this picture, gathers all of that raw information and assembles it into a live image of the world. Perception was thought to flow mostly from outside in. The newer picture suggests something almost opposite. The brain, it turns out, is not sitting quietly, waiting for signals. It is constantly generating its own best guess about what the world is like, moment by moment. Before you even open your eyes in the morning, your brain has already been rehearsing possible mornings, the shape of the ceiling, the feel of the sheets, the likely sounds of the street. When you finally do open your eyes, the incoming information does not paint a picture from scratch. It corrects, gently, a picture your brain already had in mind. Perception, in this view, is a controlled hallucination, not a wild one, not a false one, a tightly disciplined one, constrained by the actual signals reaching your senses. The brain hallucinates the world, and reality's job is to keep that hallucination honest. Sit with the strangeness of that idea for a moment. When you glance at your bedroom door, you feel as if you are seeing the door. But if the predictive processing model is on the right track, most of what you experience is your brain's prediction of what a door in that place, at that time, should look like. Only the small mismatches, a coat left hanging where none was expected, an unfamiliar shadow, are actually being freshly computed. The rest is prior expectation, drawn from a lifetime of doors. This is not a defect. It is a beautiful adaptation. The world contains far more information than any nervous system could fully process in real time. By working mostly from prediction and updating only when reality disagrees, your brain saves enormous amounts of energy. It also allows for extraordinary speed. You can catch a falling glass in a fraction of a second because your brain was already predicting its trajectory before you consciously noticed it slipping. But the same mechanism has quiet implications for tonight's larger question. The room you are in right now, the room you can feel around you with such certainty, is not exactly the room in itself. It is your best guessed version of it, refined and corrected on the fly. Some parts of it are being freshly attended to, most of it is being taken on gentle trust. And when you close your eyes or step out into the hallway, the room continues in your brain as a soft, ongoing prediction, not because you are pretending it is there, but because the brain does not simply erase what it expects. This means quietly that the room you see is already the room your mind was making before you turned your head. Your perception is a kind of collaboration, always, between what the world offers and what your brain expects. Neither one alone builds the scene, and when you extend that idea to the unwatched kitchen down the hall, something soft happens. You realize that even during the day, when you swore you were seeing the kitchen with your own eyes, you were, in part, already perceiving through prediction. The kitchen you know is not only the physical room, it is your brain's model of that room, honed by years of morning coffees, small rearrangements, quiet cleanings. When you turn away, that model does not vanish, it only rests. Perhaps that is a gentle reason your certainty about the persisting kitchen feels so complete. You are not in truth remembering an outside object. You are still holding in some quiet part of you the model your brain built. The room, in that sense, has never entirely left you. It is with you now, softly maintained in the folds of your mind, even as its physical counterpart continues its own life in the dark. Here is a small experiment. It will not disturb your rest, only tilt it gently for a moment. Somewhere in each of your eyes, there is a place where the optic nerve leaves the back of the retina. At that exact spot, there are no light-detecting cells. It is, quite literally, a blind spot, a small region of your visual field where nothing can be seen. You have carried these blind spots with you every moment of your waking life, and yet, unless you have gone looking for them, you have almost certainly never noticed. When you close one eye and stare gently at a point in the room, you do not perceive a small hole in the world. You perceive a smooth, seamless space. The wall is unbroken. The window is intact. Nothing appears missing. This is because your brain, quietly and constantly, fills in the blind spot. It takes information from the surrounding areas, the color of the wall, the pattern of the wallpaper, the flow of the ceiling, and stitches an educated guess into the gap. The gap has always been there. The stitching has always been there. You have simply never been shown it. Once you know this, something in you cannot fully unknow it. Because if your brain is inventing a small patch of the visible world for you at all times, right now, in seamless silence, you have to ask, what else might it be softly inventing? Researchers have explored this question through phenomena like change blindness. In classic experiments performed since the late 1990s, people were shown two images alternating with a brief grey flicker between them. In the two images, one large detail changed. An entire building disappeared, a person swapped clothes, a color inverted, and repeatedly, participants could stare at the images for many seconds, sometimes minutes, without noticing the change. The change was not subtle, it was obvious once pointed out. But without a signal telling the brain that a specific part of the scene deserved fresh attention, the perceptual system simply carried its existing model forward, unbothered. What people saw was not entirely what was in front of them. It was, in part, what they had come expecting to see. Similar effects appear in daily life, in less contrived form. You have almost certainly failed, at some point, to notice a friend's new haircut, a rearranged piece of furniture, a small stain that had been there for days, not because your eyes did not receive the information, but because your brain, prioritizing prediction over detailed re-examination, kept offering you the older model of the room, the older model of the friend, the older model of the shirt. Tonight, when you sit with this quietly, it does not need to alarm you. Your senses are not failing you. They are doing something much stranger and more efficient. They are collaborating with your expectations to produce a world that is stable enough to move through without demanding that every square inch be freshly rendered every moment. But it does add a soft layer to our exploration. If the visible world, even while you are staring at it, is a mixture of raw signal and interior stitching, then the felt permanence of your surroundings is already, in part, a construction, not a lie, a construction. The unwatched kitchen begins to feel a little less mysterious as a limit case, and a little more familiar as an extreme of something you already live inside. Even when watching, you are always partly filling in. Even when looking directly, you are always partly inferring. The room persists in your mind not only when you leave it, it persists, gently woven, even when you are inside it, and there is a small comfort in that. It means that seeing and remembering, watching and imagining, are not the sharp opposites they seem to be at first. They are a continuous fabric, one long soft weave of guessing and correcting, holding the visible world together in a way that has always, quietly, been more than the light in your eyes. There is a moment, deep in early childhood, when a small mind slowly begins to understand something that grown-ups have long forgotten they ever had to learn. The understanding is this: things that disappear from view do not simply stop existing. Very young infants do not seem to hold this belief. When a toy is hidden under a cloth, they may not reach for it. When a caregiver leaves the room, they may not search. It is as if, from their perspective, the vanished object has genuinely left the world. Only over the first year or two of life does something we call object permanence, the intuition that unseen objects continue to exist, begin to take root. The Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget, in the early 20th century, was among the first to describe this process carefully. He watched his own children with a scientist's patience, noting when they would search for a hidden object and when they would let it go. His conclusion at the time was that object permanence developed gradually, over many months, as the infant slowly built up an internal model of a persisting world. Later, more subtle experiments have complicated that picture. In the 1980s and after, developmental psychologists such as René Bayagian devised what are called violation of expectation studies. Infants would watch small scenes, a screen going up, an object placed behind it, the screen coming down. In some scenes, everything unfolded normally. In others, the object seemed impossibly to disappear or move through solid barriers. Even babies too young to reach for hidden toys, it turned out, would stare much longer at the impossible scenes than the ordinary ones. Their looking time revealed a quiet expectation. Things should continue to exist behind screens. Objects should not simply vanish. Something in their still-forming minds already sensed that reality had rules of permanence, even before their little hands could act on the belief. This is beautiful, and it is also strangely humbling, because it suggests that your certainty about the persistence of your kitchen, of your car in the driveway, of the mountains outside the city, that certainty is not a raw perception you were born with. It is a cognitive commitment, deeply learned, refined over years, held with such quiet strength that you never see it as a commitment at all. You experience it as fact. When you close your eyes now, in the dark, and know without any question that the walls of your home are still standing, you are exercising a mental capacity that took you many months to acquire and then a lifetime to trust. You are, in a small way, still the child who learned that the world does not vanish when it is covered by a cloth, and now covers it with something much larger: night, absence, distance, while continuing to trust that behind these covers, the world remains. This does not mean the world is not really there. It means, more precisely, that our knowledge of its persistence is a knowing built inside us, not simply read off the world's surface. Object permanence is a beautiful, learned faith. There is a quiet wisdom in noticing this, because if we grew into our confidence in the unwatched world slowly, tenderly, through experience, then perhaps we can hold that confidence a little more gently now, not tighter, not looser, simply with more awareness of how much of it is, in the deepest sense, a form of trust. A trust so old that it has become invisible, but a trust nonetheless. There is something almost sweet in that every adult listener tonight, no matter how skeptical, is still gently living inside the same original discovery a small child once made, that even when the cloth falls, the world beneath continues, and that this discovery, though it feels obvious, was one of the first and quietest miracles of your own mind. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the kitchen you know best, not the one down the hall tonight, but the one from years ago. A childhood kitchen, perhaps, or a rented apartment in a city you no longer live in. The linoleum floor, the particular light through a certain window, a drawer that always stuck a little. You feel, quite naturally, that you are remembering a real place, and in a sense you are. There was such a kitchen, it existed, but what you are actually holding right now is not a photograph of that room retrieved from a mental filing cabinet. It is something subtler, and, once you see it clearly, quietly moving. For much of the 20th century, memory was imagined as a kind of storage. You had experiences. Your brain wrote them down. Later, you looked them up. The metaphors were mechanical: filing cabinets, tape recorders, hard drives. But over the past 2 decades, research on how the brain actually manages memory has begun to suggest something very different. One of the strangest and most beautiful findings goes by the name of reconsolidation. When you recall a memory, particularly a vivid one, the neural patterns that constitute it become briefly plastic again. They open, so to speak, to editing. Whatever you feel, think, or notice while recalling can gently reshape the memory before it is stored again. It is not simply retrieved and put back. It is retrieved, softly rewritten, and returned in a slightly altered form. This means that the memory of your old kitchen is not a still photograph. It is more like a standing wave, a pattern that appears steady only because it is constantly being renewed each time you visit it. The kitchen in your mind is being subtly rewritten every time you remember it, by your current mood, by the person you have become, by the light of tonight. There is a strange twist in that thought. It means that your most treasured memories, the ones you have revisited most often, are, in some soft sense, also the most changed. The images you have carried longest are the ones most touched by the many hands of your different selves, each one leaving a fingerprint before the memory was set back down. Now bring this insight to something closer. The kitchen you left just hours ago, waiting in the dark. If you try to picture it now, the counter, the sink, the position of a chair, you are not consulting a live feed. You are consulting a memory that was already being shaped, subtly, by expectation and habit even as you formed it. And you are consulting it, now, through the softening lens of a mind lying down for sleep. The room you left is, in your mind, partly the room you are currently remembering, and that room, in turn, is being gently rebuilt by the very act of thinking of it. None of this suggests that the physical room has changed. Almost certainly it has not. The kettle is still cooling. The chair is still tucked beneath the table. Physics has been holding all of that steady in the dark. But the room you left, as an inner object, is not identical to the physical room. It never was. It is a standing wave in you, kept upright by the constant, quiet current of your own memory. This is not a sad discovery. It is, if anything, tenderly beautiful. It means that every time you revisit a place in your mind, you are not just recalling it. You are, in a soft and honest sense, keeping it alive within yourself. You are one of the ways the world continues. The unwatched room out there is held by physics. The remembered room in here is held by you. And for tonight, both of them are still. Consider, gently, what your mind will do in a few hours, when sleep finally deepens and dreaming begins. Somewhere in the middle of the night, you may find yourself walking through a house that never existed, or having a long conversation with a friend you have not spoken to in years. You will see rooms with paintings on the walls. You will smell rain on stone. You will feel emotions as vivid, sometimes more vivid, than any you have felt during the day. And none of it, the house, the friend, the paintings, the rain, will be arriving from outside your body. In dreaming, the brain becomes, briefly, its own small planet. It generates images, sounds, textures, and feelings from within, weaving them into experiences that feel entirely real while they last. Sleep researchers have found that the sensory areas of the brain, the same regions that light up when you look at real objects, become active during vivid dreams. In a very literal sense, you are seeing in the dark, not with your eyes, but with the parts of your mind that have spent your whole life learning what seeing feels like. This is quietly astonishing when you sit with it. The brain does not need external light or sound to build a world. It only needs itself. Given enough of its own internal patterns, it can construct entire rooms, entire cities, entire lifetimes of experience, with no outside stage at all. Even outside of dreaming, this world-building capacity is at work. During waking rest, when you are not focused on any particular task, certain regions of the brain, together called the default mode network, become more active. This is the network that seems especially engaged in daydreaming, mental time travel, imagining conversations, and rehearsing possible futures. It is the neural signature of the wandering mind, and it is one of the busiest systems in your head, humming quietly in the background of nearly every quiet moment. You have almost certainly, at some point, laid in bed and drifted through vivid scenes without meaning to. A conversation you might have tomorrow, a memory from decades ago, a future you hope for, half imagined into being. Those private, half-visible rooms are being built by your default mode network, running its slow, ceaseless simulations. Some rehearse things that already happened, others rehearse things that might. All of them, together, form a kind of inner theatre the mind seems to require in order to make sense of itself. Bring this back, softly, to the puzzle of the unwatched world. The mind is not only a receiver of experiences, it is also, endlessly, a producer of them. Every night, it demonstrates, with silent effortlessness, that it can build entire realities from within. Every quiet afternoon, it does a milder version of the same, imagining rooms, faces, futures that no external instrument would ever confirm. If the brain can produce worlds this rich internally, then what we call seeing the world begins to look less like a clean import and more like a very tightly regulated version of that same internal capacity, kept honest by ongoing sensory input. This is not the same as saying the world is unreal. It is saying that the boundary between the world and the mind's participation in the world is far more porous than we usually feel. The kitchen you left is real. The kitchens you have dreamed are real experiences of unreal rooms. Between those two poles lies a whole gradient of world-building, half-remembered rooms, imagined rooms, hoped-for rooms, feared rooms, all of them lit by the same inner light. And in this light, the question we began with begins to soften. Can anyone prove the world is there when you look away? Starts to feel less like a courtroom question and more like an invitation to notice how much of your life has always been spent in worlds partly built by you, and how gently, how faithfully, the outer world has consented to be met in these ways. You are always dreaming, in a sense. Waking dreams during the day, tightly bound to reality. Loose dreams in the deep hours of the night, and between them, this hushed hour, where you lie here now, holding the whole exploration inside a mind that has been quietly rehearsing worlds for as long as it has known itself. There is a room, philosophically speaking, that almost every serious thinker has stepped into at least once, and then, gently, stepped back out of. It is a very small room, with only one occupant. Its name is solipsism. Solipsism is the view that only your own mind can be certain to exist. Other people, in this view, might be nothing more than very convincing appearances within your consciousness. The world you seem to perceive might exist only as your experience of it. There might be no true outside at all, only the endless inner theatre of a single mind, mistaking its own performances for a shared reality. If you have never spent time with this idea before, it can sound almost silly. Of course other people exist. Of course the world is out there. You have friends, you have family, you have children who cry, co-workers who irritate you, strangers who help you when your car breaks down. How could all of that be only in your head? And yet, if you take the argument seriously, as many careful philosophers have, you find something quietly troubling. There is no strict, watertight way to disprove solipsism from the inside. Every proof you might offer relies on your own experience. Every friend you would call as a witness is, from your perspective, still someone appearing within your perception. You cannot step outside your own mind to check whether anything else is really there. This is not a comforting realization. Most people who encounter it seriously feel, for a while, a small vertigo, as if the ground of shared reality, so solid a moment ago, had grown briefly transparent. But here is where the story takes a gentler turn. Almost no one, in the entire history of philosophy, has genuinely lived as a solipsist. Even the philosophers who acknowledge that solipsism cannot be strictly refuted do not truly believe that they alone exist. They love people. They mourn losses. They argue with colleagues, as if those colleagues had inner lives that mattered. When their child laughs, they do not treat it as a mere image conjured in their private theatre. They treat it as another consciousness, real, precious, other. This is worth noticing. It suggests that our shared reality is not held together only by proof. It is held together by something more like a quiet, uncoerced trust, a willingness to treat the appearance of other minds as, most likely, the presence of real minds, a willingness to treat the world's constancy as, most likely, the presence of a real world. Not because we can rule out solipsism with certainty, but because the alternative view is so cold, so isolating, and so poorly matched to how life actually feels. Some philosophers have called this a kind of practical wisdom. Others have called it a form of faith, in the widest sense of the word. Not religious faith, necessarily, but the deep trust one places in the reality of others, without which love, friendship, and communication become almost meaningless. Even those who deny that faith exists at all still practice this quiet variety of it every time they speak to another person. So the solipsist's lonely room, though it cannot be locked from the outside, is one that almost no one truly moves into. We step in, look around, notice how small it is, and step back out into the wider house, not because we have proved the wider house exists in some final airtight sense, but because the shared world, with all its other minds and its many rooms, is where life actually lives. And here is a soft way to hold this in the dark, as you drift. Even if some strict philosophical certainty about the outside world is not available to you, the choice to trust it, gently, is not a naive one. It is one of the most human choices you have ever made, and you have been making it, quietly, since long before you were old enough to know that you were choosing at all. The world is likely there, the other minds are likely there, the kitchen persists, and your willingness to lean into that likelihood without demanding proof is not weakness. It is, perhaps, the very shape of being a person among persons. There is a small, strange image that the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once offered his readers, and it has become one of the most quietly influential thought experiments of the 20th century. It is called the beetle in the box. Imagine, he suggested, that every person carries a small box. Each person can look inside their own box, and inside each box is something they call a beetle. But no one is ever allowed to look inside anyone else's box. You only have your own beetle. Your neighbor only has theirs. Now, everyone uses the word beetle. When someone says, "There is a beetle in my box today," and it seems restless, others nod, saying similar things about their own boxes. Language flows smoothly, conversations happen, yet no one can actually compare their beetle to anyone else's. For all we know, one person's beetle is a small hard shell, another's is a piece of moss, and a third's is nothing at all. Wittgenstein used this image to think about private experience, especially about sensations, emotions, and inner qualities that we all describe with shared words: pain, redness, sadness, warmth. We use these terms constantly, and we understand one another, more or less, when we do. But the beetle in the box suggests that the actual inner experiences behind our shared words may be quietly different from person to person, without anyone ever being able to tell. Consider color for a moment. When you look at a ripe tomato, you experience a particular red. When your friend looks at the same tomato, they too experience red. You both agree on the label. You both feel confident you are talking about the same thing. But no one has ever peered into your friend's private field of experience to check whether their red is your red. Perhaps their red is more like your orange. Perhaps their sadness has a taste you would not recognize. Perhaps their loneliness sounds, inside them, like something you would not immediately name. The trouble is not that we are lying to each other. It is that language, remarkable as it is, can only touch the surfaces of our inner lives. Words are public, experiences are private, and so we have all been walking through the world for as long as we can remember, using the same words for what may be, in each private theatre, slightly different beetles. For the puzzle of the unwatched world, this thought has a quiet consequence. It means that even the shared world, the one we so confidently assume everyone else is also perceiving, is not fully shared at the level of felt experience. When you and a friend both look at the same sunset and murmur about how beautiful it is, you are agreeing on labels while your inner sunsets may be, in delicate ways, different. Neither of you is wrong, but neither of you can fully step into the other's box. If you follow this thought carefully, without letting it grow too heavy, it begins to reshape what you thought the world meant. There is not one experienced world with many identical viewers. There is one physical world, more or less, and many experienced worlds, as many as there are minds, each brushing up against the same physical events but weaving them into slightly different fabrics of feeling. This is not a reason for despair. If anything, it is a reason for a certain tender curiosity. When someone you love describes an experience, a piece of music that moved them, a fear that has followed them for years, a taste they cannot forget, you are not simply hearing a report from a world identical to yours. You are being given a small crack in the lid of their box, an invitation to guess at a beetle you can never fully see. That is one of the strange privileges of being human among other humans. You know that you cannot know entirely, and in that gap, love becomes an act of imagination, listening becomes an act of care, and the ordinary act of speaking becomes something quietly extraordinary, an attempt to reach across an unbridgeable inner distance with nothing but words in your hand. The unwatched world, then, is not only what lies beyond your eyes when you turn away, it is also, in some soft sense, what lies inside every other person you have ever met. A whole universe of private beetles, held in trust, described in shared words, never quite fully seen by anyone but their owner. And this suggests a soft consolation for tonight. If the world holds together despite this, if love and understanding and kindness happen anyway, then something remarkable must be helping us bridge those private boxes. Not proof, something more like patient, tender guessing, honed over millennia, gentle enough to survive the very fact that we are all more mysterious to each other than we usually let ourselves feel. Step, for a moment, out of the human perspective altogether. Not far, not into fantasy, just to the edge of your own species, to the wide field of other creatures with whom you share the world. At the start of the 20th century, the Baltic biologist Jakob von Wickskuhl introduced a word for something that had, until then, largely gone unnamed. He called it Umwelt. In English, it translates roughly to environment, but that word does not do it justice. Umwelt is not the world as it is the world as it appears to a particular kind of creature. Wickskuhl's insight was that each species inhabits its own experiential world, shaped by the particular senses, needs and neural equipment that species possesses. A tick, in his famous example, lives in an extraordinarily simple umwelt, mostly attuned to the temperature of mammalian blood and a particular scent released by their skin. A dog lives in an umwelt of scents that are for you almost imperceptible, layered like a language across every fence post and lamp post. A bat lives in an umwelt in which sound is spatial, an audible geometry of the night. The same physical field can be occupied by creatures whose experienced worlds barely overlap. Two birds and a beetle standing on the same lawn are, in a very real sense, in three different lawns at once. Some of the most striking examples come from vision. Honeybees, for instance, see into the ultraviolet range of light, which humans cannot perceive at all. Under a bee's eye, many flowers we call yellow or white burst into patterns and lines, like landing strips guiding them toward nectar. To a bee, a meadow is a glowing map. To us, it is a soft field of color. Both perceptions are valid, neither is complete. Mantis shrimp, small crustaceans living in tropical seas, take this further still. They have, depending on the species, up to 16 types of photoreceptors in their eyes, compared with our 3. What their world looks like, no one can honestly say. Their neural processing may not turn all of that raw data into the elaborate color experience we might imagine, but they clearly live in a visual reality shaped by dimensions of light we simply do not access. There is a small, quiet vertigo in noticing this, because it means the meadow, the sea, the forest, every landscape on Earth is being watched from a great variety of angles at once, none of them privileged, none of them wrong. The idea of the world as it truly is begins to feel once more softer than we thought. There are many worlds nested inside the physical world, one for each kind of eye that opens. Umwelt reminds us that even the question, "Is the world there when I look away?" is being asked in only one voice among many. When you close your eyes tonight, the world does not go dark for the bees, or the owls, or the deep-sea fish, or the bacteria in the soil. It does not even go dark for the dog at your feet, if you have one. for whom the same darkness is full of complex scents rising from the floorboards. Your particular umwelt is going quiet. The wider ensemble is not. In some way, this is deeply comforting. You are not the last light in the room. Even inside your own home, if you are still, you can imagine the tiny umwelts of insects going about their evening business in corners you never see. Their reality is unfolding right now, alongside yours. Your absence from awareness does not remove any of it. It only shifts the balance of who is currently listening. And beyond your home, across every meadow and mountain and city street, an enormous chorus of umwelts is being lived out, moment by moment, none of them ever fully translatable into human words. The world, in this sense, is being watched constantly, but not always by you or anyone like you. It is being watched by whatever manages to have eyes, ears, skin, antennae, receptors, countless small perspectives, each holding a fragment of the whole in place. The unwatched world, understood through umwelt, turns out to be less unwatched than we assumed. It is only, for a while, unnoticed by us. Elsewhere, other minds, many of them without our kind of self-awareness, but minds nonetheless, are quietly attending to their share of things. The kitchen may be dark to you, it is not dark to whatever small life passes silently along its walls. Even among humans, sharing more or less the same senses and biology, the world is not entirely one thing. Anthropologists, linguists, and psychologists have gently discovered over the last century that the very outside world we assume is being commonly perceived is in fact partly built by the culture we happen to be raised inside. Consider color once more, but this time not across species, across languages. Different languages carve up the color spectrum differently. Some have many terms for what English speakers would simply call blue or green. Others use a single word to cover a wide swath that English would break into several. Russian, for example, has distinct basic terms for lighter and darker blue, treated more like separate colors than shades. Some traditional languages have what linguists sometimes call a GRU region, a single term covering colors that English speakers might split between green and blue. Studies have suggested gently that speakers of these different languages do not just talk about color differently, they also, in subtle ways, perceive color differently. Russian speakers, in some experiments, are slightly faster at distinguishing lighter from darker blues than English speakers. Where a language draws its color boundaries, our perceptual attention seems to follow. This does not mean people from different cultures live in radically different worlds. A red apple is a red apple in every language that has any color words at all, but the fine-grained texture of color experience, where one shade seems clearly distinct from another, where two shades feel like slight variations of the same thing, appears to be shaped, quietly, by the vocabulary our particular linguistic community handed us. Something similar has been observed with even more basic visual illusions. The Muller-Lyer illusion, in which two lines of equal length appear unequal because of the arrows at their ends, has long been taught as a universal quirk of the human visual system, but research beginning in the mid-20th century and refined by cross-cultural psychologists in more recent decades has quietly shown that the illusion is not equally strong for everyone. People raised in environments with many rectangular corners, modern urban buildings, boxed rooms, right-angled furniture, tend to fall for the illusion more strongly than people raised in environments where such geometry is less central. This suggests that even simple perceptions of length are shaped in part by long-term visual training. Your eyes learn over years what kinds of shapes to expect in the world. Your brain then bends the raw input toward those expectations. Even something as apparently basic as "how long is that line?" is a small conversation between biology and culture. Once you notice this, the layers begin to multiply. The way you interpret facial expressions, the way you feel about certain sounds, the way you perceive time as flowing forward, many of these have quiet cultural fingerprints, not enough to make communication impossible, never enough to break the shared physical world into different physical worlds, but enough to soften the assumption that the world out there is being uniformly received by every mind that meets it. If Umwelt shows us that different species inhabit different experiential worlds, culture shows us that even within our own species, there are gentle variations of world nested inside. A city person and a person raised in an open desert do not see the horizon in quite the same way. A speaker of one tongue and a speaker of another do not attend to the world's colours in quite the same rhythm. Bring this back to the room you are in. Its walls, its shapes, its shades. Notice how much of the way you feel about this room comes from a lifetime of being taught what rooms should look like, how light should fall, what colours should coexist. Even before you began this journey tonight, culture had already been at work in you, shaping the felt texture of every unwatched room you have ever left behind. The world is real. The world is out there, but the world we perceive is always, in part, a co-authored draft. Nature writes the sentences, culture edits the punctuation, and we, without ever quite knowing it, hold the final page. That is not a reason to distrust your senses, it is a reason to hold them gently, aware that the world you know is a kind of shared craftwork, quietly built by countless hands you will never meet. If your perception can be partly authored by culture, and your inner experience is a beetle in a box no one else can see, then how does anything as sturdy as everyday reality actually hold itself together? How is it that most of the time, most of the world seems to line up so reliably for so many people at once? Part of the answer lies in physics, as we have already glimpsed. The environment measures itself. Decoherence keeps the moon steady. Objects do not need your gaze to persist. But part of the answer lies in something warmer and more human. It lies in the quiet, endless act of shared witnessing that people do for each other all day, every day. In a very real sense, we hold each other's worlds in place. Think about how much of what you know about the world you have never personally verified. You have not been to most of the countries that appear on the maps in your head. You have not personally measured the age of the Earth. You have not seen the far side of the moon with your own eyes. Nearly everything beyond your immediate life you know because other people have told you, and their telling has been confirmed by still other people, whose telling has been supported by measurements you trust, made by strangers you will never meet. Reality, in that sense, is a great tapestry woven by many hands. Each witness adds a small stitch. Each testimony is checked against others. Where enough voices, from enough angles, agree, a city exists, a star exists, a war happened, a treatment works, we begin to treat the pattern as reliable, not because we personally verified it, but because the web of witnesses is dense enough that it would take an extraordinary conspiracy of accident and dishonesty for the whole thing to be wrong. This is the social glue of reality. It is what turns a private impression into a shared world. You experience it constantly, in tiny ways. You leave your kitchen. Later a family member enters. They see the kettle on the counter, the dish in the sink. Perhaps they mention them in passing. Perhaps they simply move through the room without comment. Either way, they have, quietly, held the kitchen in place for the world on your behalf. Even if you never speak of it, the fact that another human passed through it and found it unremarkable is a kind of confirmation that things are as they should be. Multiply that gesture across every room, every street, every landmark. Millions of such small witnessings happen every hour on Earth. Strangers pass the same buildings, delivery drivers move down the same roads, cameras record the same intersections, weather stations note the same skies. Not one of these events on its own proves the world. Taken together, they form a web so dense that skepticism, though possible in theory, becomes practically impossible to sustain for long. There is something touching about this, once you feel it clearly. Whenever you leave a place, you are not simply abandoning it to the dark. You are, in effect, handing it into a great collective attention that includes not only physics but every other creature that will pass through it in your absence. The world you cannot see is being seen by others. The people you cannot see are being seen by still others. And they, in turn, are seeing places on your behalf, so that when you finally arrive, they are already there, arranged, familiar, ready. This is one of the quietest gifts of being a member of a species that speaks and gathers and remembers together. It means that no one, in a life full of other people, is ever truly the sole watcher of their world. Even the most isolated hermit is, without knowing it, held inside a wider human awareness, the maps that show where he lives, the memories others hold of him, the systems that continue to know his name. The unwatched world, then, may not exist in the strong sense some philosophers once feared. There is almost nowhere on Earth truly outside every awareness. When you close your eyes tonight, other humans are awake somewhere, other animals are alert somewhere, instruments are recording, satellites are watching from above. The universe is measuring itself in its patient physical way. You are not the whole of reality's audience. You are, more tenderly, one seat in a great, mostly quiet theatre. Your gaze matters, but your rest does not empty the room. And so the question we began the night with, can anyone prove the world is there when you look away, begins to fold into something softer, perhaps not proof in the courtroom sense, but something warmer, a great layered continuity of watching, of witnessing, of caring, that has been holding everything together long before your attention arrived, and that will still be at work when your attention finally, gratefully, lets go. Somewhere in the early 2000s, the philosopher Nick Bostrom, then at the University of Oxford, wrote a careful paper that would ripple far beyond the halls of academic philosophy. Its topic, on its surface, sounded like something out of a science fiction novel. Its argument on the inside was surprisingly restrained. Bostrom did not claim that we live in a simulation. That is the piece of his argument most often lost in translation. What he offered instead was what he called a trilemma, a choice among three possibilities, one of which, he suggested, was almost certainly true. The first possibility, any civilization capable of running vast, richly detailed simulations of conscious beings, tends to go extinct before reaching that stage. The second, such civilizations exist but, for some reason, choose not to run such simulations, perhaps out of ethics, boredom, or values we cannot easily guess. The third, such civilizations do exist and do run many such simulations, in which case, statistically, the vast majority of conscious beings in the universe would be simulated rather than original. If the third is true, then any given conscious being, including you, tonight, has in some sense a higher chance of being one of the many simulated observers than of being one of the rarer original ones. It is important to hold this carefully. Bostrom did not argue that we are in a simulation. He argued that we cannot easily know which branch of the trilemma actually reflects our situation. The argument is a philosophical exercise, not a scientific proof. Even so, it is worth sitting with for a moment, because it touches, in its own strange way, the very question we have been circling all night. If the world could be a simulation, then the reality behind our kitchens, our cities, our stars, would be different from what we assume. Not necessarily worse, not necessarily fake, just different, nested inside another layer. But here is the soft twist, and it is the one that many casual retellings of Bostrom's argument miss. Even if we are simulated, the felt reality of our lives is not thereby diminished. A kettle that is part of a simulation still functions as a kettle. A friend whose consciousness is generated within a simulation is in every relational sense still a friend. A loss experienced inside a simulated life is still a real loss, felt by a real experiencing subject, whatever the substrate. Some have found this deeply consoling. It suggests that the meaning of our lives does not rest on the ultimate physical status of the reality that hosts them. Whether the walls of the world are made of atoms, information, or something we do not yet have words for, the moral and emotional weight of our lives remains intact. Love still matters, kindness still matters, what you do here still counts, whatever here turns out to be at the deepest level. For a channel like this one, held between science and gentleness, Bostrom's trilemma is worth treating tenderly, not as a scary claim that nothing is real, not as a triumphant claim that everything is a video game, but as one more reminder that the deep nature of reality is not something we have finished mapping. Faith traditions across the world have long spoken of layered realities, of a creation held within a larger reality that gives it being. Modern speculative philosophy, in its own vocabulary, has arrived at a curiously nearby humility. Neither the mystic nor the philosopher can prove in a hard sense that the world we know is the only or ultimate layer of what is. Both find themselves, at their most honest moments, standing at the same soft edge of understanding. Tonight, you do not need to decide anything about this. You do not need to accept or reject the simulation possibility. You only need to notice that even in its most speculative form, it does not touch the softest, closest facts of your life. Your breath is still your breath. The warmth of the blanket is still warmth. The kitchen, whatever its ultimate metaphysical wrapper, is still, in the felt world that matters most to you, exactly where you left it. Move gently from philosophy back toward physics. In the middle of the 20th century, a young graduate student named Hugh Everett proposed an interpretation of quantum mechanics so bold that his own advisor, though impressed, seemed uncertain what to do with it. Everett was troubled by the strange step in quantum theory, where a wave function collapses into a single outcome upon measurement. Where did the other possibilities go, he wondered? Did they simply vanish, or did they persist in some way we could not see? His answer, later called the many worlds interpretation, was radical in its simplicity. Perhaps the wave function never collapses at all. Perhaps every possible outcome of every quantum event actually occurs, but in a branching multitude of parallel universes, each just as real as the one we happen to be experiencing. In such a picture, when the electron in the double-slit experiment could go either through the left or the right slit, it does not choose. Reality itself, in a manner of speaking, splits. In one branch of the universal wave function, the particle went left. In another, it went right. Observers exist in both. Each of them believes they saw a single definite outcome. Each of them is right within their own branch. If this is taken to its logical conclusion, and this is a very serious if, then the same could apply to larger events. Every quantum fluctuation, every microscopic randomness, every small branching in the world could correspond to a splitting of realities. Somewhere, in the space of all possible branches, there might exist versions of tonight in which you never fell asleep, in which you had a different life, in which the kitchen was arranged differently. Uncountable, unreachable kitchens. It is a startling picture. It is also, importantly, only one possible reading of the quantum equations. Many physicists find it elegant because it removes the awkward collapse step from the theory. Others find it excessive because it requires an almost unimaginable amount of hidden reality to explain the small handful of outcomes we ever see. Still others treat it more like a mathematical tool than a claim about actual worlds. For our night's exploration, the many worlds interpretation should be held with two hands. Firm enough to appreciate its seriousness, this is not fringe science. Loose enough to remember it is not confirmed truth. No experiment has yet distinguished many worlds from other interpretations, and no experiment may ever be able to. What it offers to a curious mind, though, is a strange kind of thought experiment about identity, because if some form of branching does occur, then the you who lies here tonight would not be the only version. Other versions might have chosen differently at pivotal moments. Other versions might exist in worlds slightly rearranged. Others still might not exist at all. Notice gently that we are not claiming any of this is true. We are noting the shape of the picture, and even in this thought experiment mode, something quiet happens. The particular life you are living, this specific room, this specific breath, becomes not a random inevitability, but a particular unfolding, one path among many possible ones, chosen by circumstance and grace. Whether or not other versions exist, this version exists. Whether or not other kitchens shimmer in inaccessible branches, this kitchen sits in the dark down the hall, in the only branch you can reach. Traditions of faith around the world have long emphasized the sacredness of the particular life one is given, the mystery of why you are you and not someone else. Everett's proposal, however speculative, does not touch that sacredness. Even if the multiverse is real, your thisness, this life, this moment, this exhalation, is what has been entrusted to your care. The many worlds interpretation is one of the wildest thoughts modern physics has offered, but it does not turn your world into a fake. It only reminds you that whatever reality is, it may be more spacious than you assumed. And within that spaciousness, this one thin thread of it, the one you are actually living, becomes not smaller, but somehow more precious. Somewhere at the far edge of theoretical cosmology, there lives a thought experiment so strange that even the physicists who take it seriously mostly treat it as a warning sign. It is called the Boltzmann brain, named after the 19th century Austrian physicist Ludwig Boltzmann, and it appears in serious discussions about the long-term future of the universe and the nature of probability. Here is the setup. softened for a night like tonight. Imagine a universe that lasts an extraordinarily long time, trillions of years perhaps, or something far beyond. Given enough time, and given the way random fluctuations work in physics, extremely unlikely things eventually happen somewhere. Very occasionally, in an otherwise empty and cold cosmic wasteland, particles might briefly clump together in a configuration that is, for a moment, indistinguishable from a functioning brain. A brain complete with memories, thoughts, and a fleeting sense of experiencing the world. Such a brain, if it existed, would flicker into being amid the darkness, have a fraction of a second of imagined experience, perhaps including entire memories of a life it never actually lived, and then dissolve back into nothing. It would be, so to speak, a very brief hallucination of a person, made of particles and randomness, with no real body, no real past, no real world outside it. The chilling twist is not that such things are likely. In any single second they are unimaginably rare. But in some cosmological models, given enough time, they might vastly outnumber ordinary observers born from planets and evolution. And if that is so, then any given observer, including you, right now, listening in the dark, might, statistically, be more likely to be one of these fleeting configurations than a real embodied being with a coherent life. Read that once, softly, and set it back down, because this is precisely the point at which most physicists agree that something has gone wrong. The Boltzmann brain scenario is treated, in the mainstream of cosmology, less as a serious proposal about who we are, and more as a warning about certain kinds of theories. If a physical model predicts that most conscious beings should be Boltzmann brains, then, most researchers argue, something is off about the model. The predictions do not match the coherent, orderly, densely connected reality we actually experience. Boltzmann brains are a boundary case, a diagnostic tool, a way for theorists to notice when their assumptions have wandered somewhere strange. It is worth pausing here to say clearly, your life does not have the signature of a Boltzmann brain. You have a body. You have decades of memory. Your experiences fit together with each other, with the physics of your surroundings, with the reports of other people. A random fluctuation of particles would not, on any reasonable estimate, produce such a coherent and consistent life. The world you know behaves like a real, ordered world, not like a momentary hallucination. So why bring this thought experiment into a calm walk through the puzzle of the unwatched world? Because it shows how far human curiosity has been willing to go in questioning the ordinary furniture of reality. Serious minds, sitting with equations and long timescales, have imagined the possibility that a whole life like yours could be, in principle, a very brief cosmic accident. They have looked at that possibility, sat with it honestly, and, importantly, mostly concluded that it does not fit our world. There is a soft comfort in that. The very fact that the Boltzmann brain scenario is used as a signal of something has gone wrong in a theory is itself a quiet endorsement of the reality of your life. Physicists treat the coherence of your world as evidence, your continuous memories, your steady kitchen, your familiar bed. These are not random. Ordinary life is precisely the kind of thing a random universe should not produce easily. Its stability is itself a kind of clue that something more than pure chance is holding it together. You do not need to accept any grand claim to feel this. You only need to notice that at the outer edge of thought experiments, where minds might briefly imagine whole worlds, our own steady, humdrum reality quietly refuses to look like one of those flickers. It looks, instead, like a world that has been here for a while, that will still be here in the morning, and that would not need a random fluctuation to explain its persistence. That is enough for tonight. Not certainty, but a soft, considered permission to trust the ground you are lying on, and to let the strangest edges of cosmology remain, gently, at their edges. There is another modern speculation, quite different from Bostrom's simulation trilemma, that also plays with the idea of reality being, at its base, something like information. It appears under names like digital physics and connects, in strange ways, to serious research on what is called the holographic principle. Begin softly, without trying to grasp everything at once. For most of history, we have imagined the world as made of stuff, small stuff, atoms, particles, waves, but stuff nonetheless, material, substance, something you could in principle cut into, and find more of. In the 20th century, that picture began to shift. Quantum theory suggested that at the smallest scales, stuff behaves less like little rocks and more like patterns of possibility described by mathematical relationships. General relativity suggested that space itself was flexible, curved, entangled with time, and more recently, in the last few decades, some theorists have begun to wonder whether the deepest layer of reality is not stuff at all, but rather information, patterns of yes and no, of on and off, of relationships between events. The holographic principle, developed in the 1990s by physicists such as Gerard Hoved and Leonard Susskind, is one of the most striking versions of this idea. It suggests that all the information contained within a region of space can, in a specific mathematical sense, be described by data on the surface enclosing that region, as if the three-dimensional interior of a sphere could be represented, without loss, by patterns on its two-dimensional boundary. In their thinking, the volume of the universe might, in some formal sense, be a kind of projection from a lower-dimensional set of data. Even for the physicists who developed the principle, this is not a claim that space is unreal or a hallucination. It is a technical statement about the deep relationships between geometry, information, and gravity, arising from work on black holes and quantum field theory. It is provisional, mathematical, and still being explored. Digital physics, in its more speculative forms, takes such ideas as inspiration for a broader picture. It asks whether the universe might, at its most fundamental level, be more like a vast computation than a collection of objects. Not a computer in the sense of a specific machine in a specific room, but a pattern of relationships behaving in ways that resemble how information behaves. Space, in such a picture, might be more pixelated than continuous. Time might be a sequence of updates. Physical laws might be like a rule book governing which patterns can follow which. None of this is proven. Some of it is speculative in ways even friendly physicists gently critique, but it is not fringe. Serious researchers have followed these threads into serious journals. They have not concluded that space is fake. They have suggested that space, whatever it ultimately is, may be less like a static container and more like a rich, structured relationship among informational patterns. For the puzzle of the unwatched world, this offers yet another gentle loosening. If the deepest layer of reality is closer to information than to substance, then the question, does the room exist when no one is there, becomes even harder to phrase in the old way. Because information is not a thing sitting somewhere, it is a pattern in relationships. It does not need a spatial location to persist. It can be preserved in the very structure of the world's ongoing regularities. Bring this back to your kitchen. If, at the deepest level, the room is not simply a set of objects in a container of space, but a persistent pattern of relationships in the great informational fabric of reality, then its persistence when you leave it does not require any single observer. It only requires that the pattern remain consistent with itself and with the rest of the fabric, which, according to the way physics has been steadily unfolding, is exactly what such patterns do. Notice, though, that none of this dissolves the felt solidity of the room. Whether reality is made of stuff, or of information, or of something else we do not yet have words for, the kitchen is still, on the level that matters to your morning, the kitchen. The chair is still the chair. The kettle is still the kettle. What changes is not the reality of the room, but the vocabulary we might one day use to describe why it is so quietly, reliably there. And in some strange way, that is welcome. The mystery of the world does not become smaller in this picture. It becomes stranger, richer, and even more layered. Reality, once we stop trying to hold it entirely with our old metaphors, seems to breathe with a depth that no single frame quite fits. By this point in the night, you may have noticed something quiet. Every framework we have visited, Berkeley's mind-centered world, Kant's veil, decoherence, many worlds, simulations, information, participatory observers, has offered a different way of describing the same underlying puzzle. Each one shines a light on some part of reality. Each one leaves other parts in shadow. This is, in itself, one of the most honest lessons an evening like this can offer. Every serious model of the world, whether scientific or philosophical, is a way of talking about reality, not the whole of reality itself. It is a language for describing patterns, a map drawn with careful attention, but still a map, different from the terrain it represents. When one map does not capture everything, we do not usually conclude that the terrain is broken. We conclude that the map is partial. We work on other maps. We compare them. Physics, at its most mature, knows this. Its greatest practitioners have often been its most humble. Einstein spent decades searching for a deeper theory beyond quantum mechanics, uneasy with its strange features, respectful of its successes. Bohr insisted that our theories describe not reality in itself, but are reliable ways of talking about experiments. Wheeler, near the end of his life, spoke openly of great mysteries that no equation had yet touched. Philosophers have often traveled a parallel path. Kant admitted that we cannot reach the thing in itself. Wittgenstein warned about the limits of language. Many contemporary thinkers who work in the philosophy of mind or philosophy of science are frank about the boundaries of what any human framework can achieve. And here, quietly, something touching emerges. Because at this outer edge of models, the honest scientist and the honest mystic begin to sound strangely alike. Both admit that the human mind, remarkable as it is, has limits. Both noticed that beyond every layer of description, another layer opens. Both accept that some questions may never be fully answered inside our current vocabulary, and that this is not a failure, but a feature of engaging with something so large. Both, in their best moments, respond to that shared boundary, not with despair, but with wonder. The mystic says, the truth is greater than our words. The scientist says, our theories are unfinished. The reality they aim at exceeds them. Different traditions, different languages, but the same soft admission at the horizon. For our long walk tonight, this convergence matters, because we asked a very old question, can anyone prove the world is there when you look away? And we have gathered many partial answers. Berkeley's mind in God, decoherence is constant self-measurement, cognitive science is controlled hallucination, culture's shared witnessing, and the speculative fringes of simulations, many worlds and informational realities, each one lends something. None of them completes the story. And rather than treating that as a failure, we can hold it as a small revelation that some truths about reality may not be built to be captured entirely, but to be lived with, to be walked around, considered from many angles, felt on many nights, kept company with rather than solved. That is not weakness in your understanding. It is a kind of adulthood in it, a willingness to say, I do not know all of what this is, and I still trust it enough to live within it. A willingness to lean gently against a door that never fully opens, and to find peace in the shape of the doorway rather than the frustration of the lock. The universe seems to reward this posture. It does not reveal itself to those who demand a single answer. It reveals itself, in fragments, to those who are willing to hold many partial answers in the same open hand. And it seems to whisper that behind those partial answers, something deeper is at work, something that may be reachable in awe, in love, in silence, more than in any specific formula. You do not need to name that deeper something tonight. You do not need to have a final theology or a final theory of physics. You only need to notice that the honest scientist and the honest mystic have both in the end been kind enough to leave you a small, quiet space at the edge of the map, a space large enough to breathe in, a space where reverence and reason can both stand without arguing. And with that space open, we can finally turn homeward, back toward the kitchen where the night began. Somewhere along the long, slow walk of this evening, an answer has been gently unfolding, not a sharp one, not one that fits on a single line, but an answer nonetheless. Can anyone prove the world is there when you look away? In the strictest sense, no. Every attempt at proof turns out to require an observer. Every measurement must be witnessed at some point to become knowledge. The old dream of a view from nowhere, in which the world could be watched with no watcher at all, has quietly retired from serious thought. And yet, this is not the same as saying the world depends on you. Decoherence, that patient physical process, tells us that reality is measuring itself constantly. Every object is engaged in an ocean of small interactions with photons, molecules, and forces. The kettle in your kitchen is being brushed by the world, moment after moment, whether or not any human eye is present. Your absence from it does not remove the universe's attention, and shared observation adds another quiet layer of steadiness. Other people, other creatures, other instruments, a whole planet of witnesses, most of them silent, most of them uninterested in your kitchen specifically, continue to move through their share of reality. Between them, the world is watched, on average, all the time, so the honest answer is layered. In one sense, no strict proof is possible. In another sense, the world's persistence is enormously well supported by physics, by biology, by the ordinary rhythms of shared life. But then there is the deeper why any of this holds together at all, why there is something rather than nothing, why the universe is orderly enough to have kettles and kitchens and observers in the first place. These questions have not been answered tonight. They may never be answered by human minds in the way we usually mean the word. That is not a failure. It is a feature of standing at the edge of what any single mind can grasp, and it leaves open the very oldest kinds of wondering, the wonder of the mystic, the wonder of the child, the wonder of the sleepless adult lying in a quiet room, asking a question the whole species has been asking, in different accents, for as long as there have been species who ask. You can settle, tonight, on this soft synthesis. The world is almost certainly there when you look away, and the deepest reasons why it is there, and why you are here to look, remain a mystery still worthy of your reverence. Both the reassurance and the mystery, together, are what the long night has actually given you. If the world does not depend on your watching, something quietly changes in the shape of your life. It becomes, in a small way, softer to carry. For an overthinker, especially at 3 a.m., there can be a strange invisible weight, a sense of needing to keep everything in mind, to hold everyone in awareness, to notice everything so nothing slips into the dark. Sometimes this can feel almost sacred, as if attention itself were a duty owed to the world. And attention can indeed be a gift, but it can also become a burden, quietly, when we imagine, without ever saying so aloud, that our watching is what holds things together. That if we stop paying attention to a loved one for a moment, we fail them. That if we stop worrying about a situation, it will unravel. That the world requires our constant surveillance to remain safe. Tonight, gently, that picture can be laid down. The world does not need you to hold it together. Physics is doing its steady work. Other people are living their own lives, cared for by others, held by systems and communities and their own strengths. Your attention, precious as it is not the load-bearing wall of reality. When you rest, the sun still rises. When you close your eyes, other eyes are open. When you finally sleep, the ceiling above you continues to be a ceiling. What becomes of your attention then, if it is not a burden? It becomes something more beautiful, a gift. When you look at a friend's face and truly see it, you are not preserving them from vanishing. They were already there. You are, instead, honoring their presence, joining them in a small, warm circle of shared awareness. When you watch a sunset, you are not keeping the sunset from disappearing. You are simply choosing to be present with it, to let something ordinary become, for you, a small holiness. This is what an unwatched world quietly offers back to you. Freedom from the false duty of holding everything up, permission to rest, permission to close your eyes, permission to let go of the fantasy that if you stopped watching, everything would fall apart. In its place, a new kind of attention becomes possible, one born not from fear, but from care, not from anxiety, but from love, not from the sense that you must, but from the sense that you are lucky enough to. That is a very old ethical intuition, dressed in modern clothing tonight. Wisdom traditions throughout the world have long taught that the universe is being held by something larger than any single mind. Call it God, call it the natural order, call it whatever your heart is comfortable with. Their moral teaching is often the same. You are not the sole guardian of reality. You are a guest in it, invited to attend to your small part with tenderness. Modern physics does not compete with this. It quietly agrees. The world is being watched, in its own way, everywhere. And within that vast, patient watching, your one soft awareness has a place, not as scaffolding, but as blessing. There is a way of living that does not require every question to be closed. It is often quieter than the way we are trained to live. It is not resignation. It is not laziness. It is a kind of practiced hospitality toward mystery. Contemplative traditions across many cultures have made a home of this hospitality. Christian mystics have spoken of the cloud of unknowing, in which the deepest truths are approached in silence rather than in exact words. Sufi poets have written of a divine mystery that reveals itself only to those willing not to grasp it too tightly. Zen teachers have offered paradoxical stories, koans, whose purpose is not to be solved, but to be lived with until the questioner becomes a little softer, a little more open. In every case, mystery is treated not as an obstacle to overcome, but as a companion to walk beside. Science, at its most mature, quietly practices the same posture, though with different vocabulary. The best physicists, mathematicians and biologists spend their days working carefully at the edges of what is known, comfortable with the truth that many questions will remain open long after they themselves are gone. Their work is not motivated by a fantasy of finishing the puzzle. It is motivated by the joy of adding one more careful piece, one more small clarification, one more honest question to a puzzle whose full shape may exceed any one lifetime. There is a kind of humility in this, not the humility of feeling small in a bad way, but the humility of feeling small in a right-sized way. You are not the center of the universe, nor are you nothing. You are a mind, embedded in a much wider mind of nature, given a brief time to notice, to think, to love, and to wonder. If tonight's long walk has done anything for you, it may be to gently loosen the grip of any voice inside you that demands complete answers to impossible questions. The voice that says, "Until I know for sure whether the world is really there, I cannot rest." The voice that says, "Until I understand every layer of reality, I cannot be at peace." The voice that says, "If I cannot be certain, I might be foolish to hope." That voice is not wrong to care, but it does not need to be in charge, especially at this hour. Something else can be in charge now. Something softer, a quieter voice that says, "I do not know everything, and that is allowed. I have thought carefully tonight, and I still do not have proofs, and I can still be at peace. I have looked at the world from many angles, and it remains strange and beautiful, and I can still love the small, real details of my life." Wonder without answers is not the absence of understanding. It is a deeper kind of understanding, the kind that knows how much it does not know and finds that knowledge, instead of frightening, oddly tender. This is one of the truest gifts of a night like this. It gives you permission to keep the question open and to keep living well inside it. The world does not require you to solve it in order to trust it. It only asks that you be willing to remain with it, gently, for as long as you are here. And so we come, quietly, back to where we began. To the kitchen at the end of the hall, to the kettle cooling on the counter, to the dish in the sink, holding the memory of the light that used to fall on it. It has been there this entire time. It has not needed you to lie awake in order to remain. It does not need you now. You have walked a very long way tonight, through old philosophers with their careful words, through physicists and their strange, patient experiments, through the folds of your own brain and its quiet ways of building rooms from within, through the many other minds, human and otherwise, that share this world with you, and through the far edges of speculation, where thought becomes more like a soft hand reaching out towards something too large for any single word. Now, in the last soft stretch, there is nothing more to solve, nothing more to prove. There is only your breath, gently rising and falling. There is only the weight of your body, held by the mattress. There is only the darkness of the room, and the far darker distance of the sleeping world outside. Somewhere down the hall, the kitchen is still there. Whatever holds it in place, holds it now. The physics that keeps its walls upright, the ordinary matter that keeps its floor solid, the vast patient interaction of the universe with itself, all of it, ongoing, without needing your attention, and whatever deeper mystery lies behind those layers of physics, holding the whole of it in some way we cannot fully name, is also, quietly, at work, not less real for being unnameable, not less caring for being beyond your instruments. If it holds the world, then it holds you too, your bed, your room, your slow breath, your gently tiring mind, all of it within the same wide keeping. You do not have to watch anything now. You do not have to hold anything up. You do not have to answer any final question tonight. You have thought about the world with care, and you have earned this rest. Let your shoulders soften, let your jaw unclench, let the small muscles around your eyes relax. Feel the warmth just under the blanket where your skin has heated the fabric. Feel the coolness at the edges of the sheet. Notice how, without any effort from you, breath keeps arriving, one after another, like tides that never had to be organized. Somewhere, the kitchen, somewhere, the street outside, somewhere, the sleeping city, somewhere, the mountains under a night sky, and the ocean, and the wide, slow stars, all of them held, all of them continuing, none of them asking anything of you. You can let go now. You can trust the wide, quiet keeping of things. The universe has been watching itself for a very long time, and it is very good at it. Wherever your thoughts drift next, whichever soft image finds you, whichever dream begins to gather at the edge of awareness, you are safe here. The world is there when you look away. The world is there while you sleep. And the world will be there, still, in the soft morning light, waiting for the gentlest possible return of your eyes. Rest now. All is well. All is held.